All right, Ashwin, we are live, my friend. How are you today?
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Eddie.
Beautiful. Yes, my pleasure. Absolutely. This is round 2 for us. And the last time we did this, we had so much fun. And you mentioned the Australian Essential 8 right toward the end of the show. And I said,
Indeed.
what's that about? And it's led us to a new program. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you listening live, for those of you who will be listening in the archive later, you can certainly participate even in the archive later by commenting, and we will come back to it and we can answer those kinds of questions. Otherwise, to a live audience listening to us right now, please use the comments section, ask questions, comment, jump in. Let's have some fun. Now, given the state of cybersecurity and the conflicts that are going on around the world today, we have governments weighing in, attempting to, set things right, attempting to protect their citizenry, the corporations that pay massive taxes to keep governments going. And the Essential 8 is something that is trying to do this. This is my understanding. Now, despite my deft accent, I'm calling out of New Jersey, America today. So I don't know too much about this. And I've got Ashwin, who is an expert on this. You've in fact created a tool to help customers understand this. So why don't we start at a very high level, Ashwin? What is the Australian Essential 8 and how is it attempting to solve problems?
So, Eddie, the Essential 8 are a set of mitigation strategies. In fact, there are 8 mitigation strategies that was introduced by the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. And the idea is that it provides you with this baseline practice towards maturing your cybersecurity posture. That's what it is. And what we've had recently, due to the whole cyber warfare that we're seeing in Eastern Europe, of course, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre has actually recommended that organizations enhance their cyber maturity level. And these are the strategies. These strategies have existed for quite some time. And what the government is essentially saying is that you've really got to focus on these as a bare minimum.
Okay, so why don't we start high level? What are the 8? Let's go with that. So let's start with number 1. Which one is it?
Sure. So basically, the 8 that we have, there's varying ones. The first one is application control, right? And so basically talks about application control, what kind of applications you should be running, those malicious applications. You should have some sort of strategy to prevent malicious applications from running in your environment. The next one is around patching, right? Application patching. You and I both know the importance of patching. Then there are other ones. For example, how do you prevent, or having a strategy to prevent active content from running in your Office suite? So think of those macros. Those active contents like macros that actually are something that cyber criminals absolutely love to exploit. So we'll talk a little bit about that and some strategies around that. Then they talk about application hardening. So that's another key component that needs to be addressed to try and mitigate the risk from threat actors. The other one is around restricting privilege access. So having a strategy around controlling who has access to those key components in your environment and the level of privilege that they have. So that's really important. And other ones are around patching your operating system. Now, the thing with the Essential 8 is that it is very focused on Microsoft platform. And Eddie, you and I both know that organizations that don't just run Microsoft, and cyber criminals aren't just looking to exploit Microsoft platforms, but all the other platforms as well. Anything could be used as an entry point. So what we'll do is we'll talk about not just Microsoft, but all the other platforms that run in an environment. The other thing that they talk about is multi-factor authentication. So I think this is really important to talk about as well. And we'll look at some of the shortcomings with MFA as well, multi-factor authentication. The other controls or process that they talk about is backups, the importance of backing up regularly and having those offline backups. So again, we'll talk a bit about that.
Fantastic. Okay, so application control was first, and then another one a little bit further down was application hardening. You want to explain the difference between those two?
Sure. So application control, we're looking at basically what are the types of applications that you have in your environment, and how do you prevent those malicious applications, potentially applications that aren't really approved by the business. yet and it could be something that is an entry point for threat actors. So think of how many people that may be running Tor or any of those proxy anonymizers on their corporate devices. So we're talking about how do you strategize to mitigate the risks from those types of applications. In terms of application hardening, so application hardening is more around how do you prevent certain types of applications from running inside your environment. So think of things like those Java applications that you want to prevent, those sorts of things.
Okay, got it. I remember back in the day, a long time ago, when it came to application control, one of the ways that corporations were dealing with this was, YouTube was one. Before YouTube was, something that was useful for businesses, it was just kitty cat videos and pictures of people's food. We would just ban it, we'd just block it. Today's philosophy, I don't think lends well to just blocking and banning. Let's have a little chat about that. But first, LinkedIn user. Let's have a look who that is. That is Andy. Andy, thank you very much for your comment. Yeah, absolutely. We can. This will be living in the archive forever. So you get this recording, as it were. Just stay on the Checkpoint LinkedIn channel, or if you're calling in from YouTube, no, it's LinkedIn. You can see it there anytime, my friend. So yeah, what's the best recommendation for corporations that users consider having their mobile devices and all the applications on them to be personally theirs? So we don't just want to block, but how are we going to make sure there's no malicious content coming through some applications that, let's say, may or may not have a business use? Or are we still saying, if it doesn't have a business use, it shouldn't be part of the network?
I think it's all about context. I'll tell you a story about an engagement that I had with an organization, fairly large organization with global offices around the world. And we carried out this process called security checkup this number of years ago. And I spoke to the application team, I spoke to the security team. They were fairly confident that they had business approved applications only running on the network. And so we carried out this security checkup, and within the space of just a few minutes, we were able to find applications that hadn't been approved. In fact, applications that were high risk applications, like proxy anonymizers, like Hide My Ass and things like that. We had applications that were communicating with known command and control service as well. Right? So that's the challenge that many organizations have, is that visibility. So when I speak to organizations and they tell me that they do have controls, what I often ask is, well, how granular are those controls? How granular are those applications that you can identify? Can you identify millions of widgets? Are you able to identify hundreds and thousands of applications? Because only when you have that granular level of visibility, Eddie, can you actually then start to apply policies around that, right? So once you do have access, once you have that visibility, so for example, as you said, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or whatever, it might be that you don't want to allow that application for everybody, but then there may be a small subset of users that you do want to give them access to that particular thing. Maybe it's for hiring purposes, for example, HR maybe. So how do you do that? How do you actually allow a small subset of users access to an application, but not to the general population? So it's really important that you have controls around that.
Right. So it's more about, so I think what you're saying is the biggest stress you're seeing in the marketplace right now is more about, do you even know what applications are running? We have let's see here, a question here from Ashley. Ashley says, attack surface reduction rules, among other rules from maturity level 2, are specifically targeted at Windows control. How do you deal with this problem for Linux fleet? Okay, that's a great question for you, man. What do you think? Thank you, Ashley.
That's a great question. And that's actually the reason why we wrote this document around how to actually mitigate or address the Essential 8.
This is the document right here, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for the interruption. And by the way, Ashwin mentioned security checkup. plus this document. There is a survey coming out at the end of our discussion. And if you click the link of the survey, we'll send all this information to you. So this is the document that Ashwin's talking about. And it's a little bit of a fine print right now, but we can get this one to you, and this will really save your bacon. Anyway, please continue, Ashwin. Thank you.
So, thanks, Eddie. So, yeah, this is why we had to write this document, because the Essential 8 is heavily focused on Microsoft, and we know that enterprises and businesses don't just run Microsoft. So this is why it's really, and by the way, there's no simple one answer here. So first of all, it's essential that you look to try and control applications, not just on the endpoint, but also at the network level. It's important to take that mindset from your endpoint, your network, to your cloud, and to your mobiles as well, right? So that's the first thing. Now, in terms of how do you do this, on the endpoints, you've got to have security controls as well. So look to partner with vendors that will provide you with security controls on the endpoint. That's how you can try and mitigate this threat at the endpoint. Look to partner with vendors who provide you with application control at the network level as well, so that you have that two-tier approach.
Gotcha, right. And so anything special then with Linux? And why do you think the Australian government didn't focus on anything? Because Linux is huge, right? I mean,
Linux is huge. Look, the Essential 8 is not something that's new. It's been around for quite some time. Right? So I think it's important for organizations to understand that the threat landscape changes, our IT environments change. That's why you're always getting new standards or new blueprints that come out. I mean, for example, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, no one was really talking about hub and spoke model, really, for cloud, for example, right? But now that our IT environments changed, well, you need new approach. So what we saw was that the Essential 8 actually had well, it wasn't addressing everything. It wasn't taking a holistic look. That's why we put together this document, which allows organizations to actually try to implement what Essential 8 is essentially trying to achieve on the endpoints, but try to achieve that across various different environments, whether it's endpoint, cloud, network, or mobile.
Right, got you. Katrina, our colleague, has just mentioned, by the way, so everybody in the chat, you can certainly find this email address here for a copy of the report. At the survey time, you're going to get a lot more detail, and then, of course, an offer to do a security checkup. When you do your security checkups, by the way, Ashwin, can you map it to the Essential 8 somehow?
Unfortunately, you can't map it to the Essential 8, but look, a security checkup is absolutely essential because it provides you this visibility, and then you can take that visibility, and what I like to say is it gives you this evidence-based approach to have conversations, whether it's conversation with your cyber executives, folks who are actually designing strategies, because it allows you to say, hey, listen, this is what we're missing. This is where we need to focus. And what we will do is we will prioritize the risks for you. So you'll see the high risks that need to be addressed. And you can certainly use the checkpoint security checkup to then validate your strategy as well. Are we actually, or even to evaluate your current strategy, say, hey, hang on, why are we not missing X, Y, and Z? Why are we missing that? And what can we do? In some cases, Eddie, you could almost take that and say, okay, we're missing these threats or these risky applications, for example. That's just one example. But what can we do with our current infrastructure? What do we need to tweak? Where do we need to update? Is it a case of we just don't have licenses available to enable those controls? Or is it a case that we don't actually have those controls in place and we need to invest?
So this free security checkup, it will actually do the discovery of those applications that you were talking about a little earlier. That's probably how you came up with that example, right? You did a security checkup and you found all of these applications at this customer site.
Absolutely.
Right.
Now, the security checkup does a lot more than just, of course, identify the applications that are running on your network. It will also identify if there are devices that's actually already compromised, maybe because it's speaking to, communicating with a known command and control server. It might be a case that you've got users who are downloading documents which haven't been detonated in a sandbox environment. So we'll detonate that for you, and we'll give you visibility of that too.
Beautiful. So let's get back to one of the things you mentioned in the Essential 8 are the macros. Explain this. Like, what is the danger here for people? Like, why is this a big deal? How are threat actors using them? And then how does the Essential 8 document, and probably more importantly, the document you put together, help resolve it?
Yes, a good question. Look, Essential 8 basically talks about disabling macros. Right now, what are macros? Well, basically these are these are controls, or these are features within documents that make it active. You can run, for example, if you're downloading an Excel spreadsheet, maybe it's got some reports there that are automated, and you basically click on buttons and generates additional reports for you. These active content is what threat actors can also leverage in part of their attack chain, meaning that they can leverage this capability to perhaps allow the threat actor to actually embed something malicious in a document. This is what we say when we talk about weaponizing a document. Threat actors can use those macros as a first stage in a multi-stage attack. And that first stage might just be that it gains persistency, or it might be that the macros will then reach out to the attacker's server and to the command and control server and so forth. So macros and active content are heavily utilized by threat actors, particularly around phishing attacks, right? Those weaponized documents that you get in your corporate email, as well as your personal emails. So that's what it's used for. Threat actors can leverage that. What you've got to do is, well, according to the Essential 8, is to disable those capabilities. But the problem, Eddie, is that sometimes you can't just disable it because you need those features, right? So what do? Well, this is where additional controls can be leveraged. These controls are not mentioned in the Essential 8, and that's what we wanted to focus on, to say, hang on, you don't have to just completely disable that. There is a safer alternative. You can use or enable active content, and you can do that as long as you put in the right checks and balances. So what are those checks and balances? Well, the first one is, of course, sandbox. Leverage sandbox so that you can understand if a document is malicious or not. The other, really, one of my favorite controls actually is a checkpoint. We call it threat extraction. The industry terminology for that is content disarm and reconstruction. And what it simply does is it will look at an active content, it will strip out all the active content out of that and provide the end user with a flat file so that the file can't actually be exploited. In parallel, once you've actually sandboxed the document, now if the document turns out to be benign, your end users can safely download the original document and use the active contents within it. So this is how you allow business to continue without actually just saying no, a blanket no.
Right. So we send the flat documents so that the person can start executing on whatever it is that document's asking them to do. So we don't slow the business
Correct.
down. And then after we've finished sanitizing in the sandbox, as long as the document's clean, you can take the full thing with all the active content in it. Is that what we're saying?
Correct. And the important thing also is that you've got to focus on not just those emails that are corporate emails, because don't forget, your end users can also be phished by their personal email, right? Especially those executives in your environment. Like, threat actors will do their reconnaissance. They will understand all the important people in your organization, and then they will go after them. And it doesn't mean that they're only going to go after via the corporate email. They'll try and also go via the personal email. So it's really important that these controls can be embedded inside your browsers. So not just at the email level, not just at the network level, but also within the browser, so that we can actually strip out those active content. The same thing applies to any of those weaponized links as well.
Right. So Gus Fahi, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Gus, is asking for a cheat sheet. Absolutely, man. So listen, Katrina's going to put up a link to the survey. In fact, Katrina, why don't you just throw that up there right now, and then maybe again at the end. just save that link so that you can fill out the survey after our discussion here. And then Gus, if we don't have that, we'll create a one-pager for you, and we'll take care of you there. So yeah, absolutely, because I think Ashwin's document is pretty heavy. So we'll get you a cheat sheet.
Yeah, Gus. So just so that Gus is aware of this, what we've done is we've actually put together a document, and it's a two-part document. So the first part allows you to actually assess your implementation of Essential 8. So you can basically carry out a self-assessment to see how mature your organization is. And that's what Eddie's showing you right now. That's scrolling there. And the second part is, how do you take the Essential 8 mindset and actually apply it across different environments, like your endpoint, your cloud, your network, and your mobile device as well, right? How do you do that? So not only how do you do that, but also how do you enhance that? So what more can you be doing in those spaces? So we've actually put that together, quite comprehensive. Have a look at that, and it'll give you a starting point on how you can enhance your Essential 8 mitigation strategy.
And that should be a clickable link for those of you who are on LinkedIn. Katrina's thrown that up there. So if you click this, fill out the survey, we promise to make sure we get you a cheat sheet as well as that full document that I just showed you, and an offer for a security checkup. Okay, so in addition, so we mentioned macros. We've spoken about a couple of the application control. You had also mentioned patching. Right. Now, why is this still a pain in the butt for people? Why is that so challenging? Help us understand, why it's challenging, and perhaps what solutions we can help people with.
Certainly. So the top 4 most leveraged attack vectors by threat actors are corporate credential reuse, vulnerabilities in third-party in software, vulnerabilities in third-party software, corporate credential reuse, and then there's 2 others, of cloud-based configuration, and so we always hear about vulnerabilities in third-party software. So patching is absolutely crucial, right? Now, the challenge when it comes to patching is that often applications that actually are vulnerable or basically have software bugs, well, it can take time for those for organizations that own that particular application to come out with a patch. What that means is, from the time a vulnerability is identified to the time a patch is created and then rolled out, but organizations are typically exposed to that result. Now, so what does that actually mean? Well, if you look at zero trust, right? Zero trust is built on the idea that you've got all of these controls that will allow the enforcement of your granular policies. Well, what happens when one of those controls themselves have a vulnerability that could allow a threat through? So that's another thing to be mindful of. And this is why it is so important that organizations leverage what we call virtual patching. So Eddie, you and I know about virtual patching because we've been talking about this for years, right? Folks, virtual patching is basically making sure that there are additional security controls that you have in place that will identify that a threat actor is trying to leverage a vulnerability. And the idea is that you're trying to block those threats. You identify and block the threats as close to the source as possible. That means if you can identify and block those at the network level, then that's an absolute must. So our recommendation here is that enable security controls like IPS and make sure that it is updated and make the signatures are updated so that you can actually block the threats at the network level.
Got it. So let's move into perhaps some of the shortcomings. If we could give it a healthy critique, no disrespect to the government putting this thing together, but cyber changes every 5 minutes. What are some of the shortcomings of the Essential 8 document, and what can we do to pick up the slack?
Sure. Look, Eddie, like you said, threat landscape changes all the time. Cyber criminals are coming out in new ways, in very, very creative ways of actually being able to breach environments. Now we're seeing software supply chain attacks. We're seeing third-party partners that provide services, that being an entry point, right? So there are certainly shortcomings, because the thing is that this document was written quite some time ago, the Essential 8. So it's really important that whilst you focus on what's required in there, it's also important to elevate the your control. So, for example, the Essential 8 doesn't talk about content disarm and reconstruction. It does not talk about sandboxing, for example. So those are some key components that's certainly missing. The Essential 8 doesn't talk about cloud security. And you and I both know that almost every organization we speak to now have a cloud presence. So having posture management within the cloud, for example, being able to do threat hunting in the cloud, for example, being able to have an architecture that is based on hub and spoke model that does segmentation within the cloud environment. Those things are not covered in the Essential 8, but it is absolutely essential if you want to mature your cybersecurity posture.
Right. And one of the things I love, this is always the cat's meow about Checkpoint, right, is the simplicity of use, because if security is too complicated, it's not followed. So then it's not security, is it? It has to be simple. I didn't say easy, I said simple, right, to follow. So one of the things, of course, I love about our technologies and what we built is one overriding policy for the big three cloud providers, including any hybrid cloud that you might also have built yourself, so that you can push a button and thread a governing master policy to each of those cloud environments. And I think it also gives you some granularity for local use, right? If you need extra additional things along the way.
Absolutely. Eddie, it's funny because I just had this conversation today with a couple of CIOs around this. And, every country is now experiencing cyber skill shortage. And most organizations I speak to now have a multi-cloud strategy. It's impossible for many organizations to actually have the same level of skill set in AWS, in Azure, in GCP. So how do you do that? How do you get that uniform security across all of your cloud environments, as well as your on-prem and your private cloud, as well as your public cloud? And so it's really important to actually look and focus for that single pane of glass that can provide you with that uniformity across all of these environments. Really, really important.
Right. And I think our research groups, if the audience goes to research.checkpoint.com, so that's research.checkpoint.com, our research group, I think about a year ago, discovered in Microsoft Azure's cloud that you can now, what was the vulnerability? You can actually make other cloud instances do and say things. I've got a note in my desk while you're talking. I might pull it out for a second. But yeah, that was a massive vulnerability that we found. And we noticed that you could essentially create command and control in somebody else's cloud environment just by having access to Azure. That has since been patched, I think. But yeah, this is why you're going to have a company like us, and I'm just going to get some comments, sit with an overriding policy to protect those cloud environments. Rob Evans, one of our colleagues, thank you very much for jumping in, saying, Gus, we'll get you the info. Absolutely. And Mark Schrader is asking, what about tax economy or IT bomb and the challenge of open source toolkits? Is that addressed? You're going to have to take that one, man. I don't even know what that question means. So go for it. Awesome, Mark. Thank you for the question. It's beautiful.
What I would say about taxonomy is this, right? It is essential that that all your tools speak the same language, right? And especially on the endpoint as well. And it's important that that language maps to industry frameworks like MITRE-TEC framework. So that is something that Checkpoints work really, really hard to do, which is to actually provide forensics, to provide capability within our logs that actually map to these credible industry frameworks that are accepted.
That's cool. That's totally cool. Okay, good stuff. I hope that's a good answer for you, Mark, but jump in and ask more questions. I love audience interaction. Katrina, thanks for helping out again by posting research.checkpoint.com.
One of the things you mentioned was around that Microsoft research. What we have seen as a trend is that there are more and more attacks now on the cloud infrastructure as well. This is something fairly new because, if you remember, Eddie, we always talk about the shared responsibility model, right? So there's certain things that the end user is responsible for, so the customer, they're responsible for the applications, the databases, and all the stuff that they spin up. And then there's the cloud provider like the Microsofts and the AWS. who are responsible for the actual infrastructure, what we've seen of late is more and more attacks on the infrastructure itself. In fact, we were one of the first organizations to have POC a vulnerability that allowed us to completely own one of the major cloud providers in terms of we could see, edit, read, delete, do anything we wanted in one of the cloud providers and all the workloads that were there, all the tenants that were there. Now, that vulnerability, of course, does not exist anymore, but just be mindful that threat actors are also focusing not just on your environment and your data, but also the cloud providers now.
Yeah, right. I mean, this is a treasure trove of information that's out there now. So of course they're going to be heavily focused on that. And you mentioned a little earlier about making sure that your endpoint as well as your network and / cloud, therefore security policies, kind of my words, connect up, right? And that's when I spoke about overriding policies. I think one of the challenges audience members immediately bring up whenever I talk one-on-one with somebody is, what you're saying is to trust you, Checkpoint, with my network, my cloud, my endpoint, right? All this stuff. Well, this is the pitch. Actually, this is what we have really set our face against the industry to say, look, reduce the number of vendors you have in your data center. Give your SIM a break here, because on average, enterprises have between 40 and 60 cyber vendors in their environments. That's just too much noise. That's too much stuff to worry about. And the reality is, I'll confidently say we can handle 80, 90% of what you've got. So we think you can get your number of vendors down to less than 10. Now, that's a lot less noise. It's a lot less for you to manage, and you get greater visibility. Any thoughts or comments around that, Ashwin?
Certainly. One of them is, I was speaking to one of the CISOs who actually is on this journey right now. And I asked him what was the driver for him. And the driver for him was fairly clear. I don't have to have 50 meetings a quarter. I can have 5 meetings a quarter now, 5 meaningful meetings with my vendors who are my partners now.
Right.
So that's from that point of view. Clearly a checkbox. The other thing is, how are you going to ever manage to have expertise in all of those tools? You're not. So it is important that you do consolidate. And consolidation, there are other benefits, of course, in terms of time to remediate a breach, all of that kind of stuff. So it absolutely makes sense to be able to consolidate and simplify your security. Absolutely. The other question I always get, Eddie, is why Checkpoint? Why not vendor, A, B, or C? Why Checkpoint?
Oh.
Why consolidate with Checkpoint? And what happens if Checkpoint becomes an issue? And so what I always say to organizations is, well, you've got to go and do a little bit of research yourself. And tell me, when was the last time you actually heard that the FBI or CISA or Australian Cybersecurity Center or any other agency warn organizations that, hey, Checkpoint infrastructure is being leveraged by threat actors to actually compromise and bypass security? When was the last time you heard that? Now, touch wood, right? Vulnerabilities happen, and so the two questions is, how long does it take an organization to address vulnerabilities, particularly those security vulnerabilities, and from security vendor, and secondly, have a look at the last 5, 10, 15 years, and just assess those security partners that you have and the number of vulnerabilities they've had in their product, because that is the time that you as an organization are exposed. You could do everything right and still be breached and still be exposed purely through no fault of your own. So when you're making decisions around consolidation, make sure you understand the history of the vendors that you want to partner with and look at the sense of urgency they actually bring to the table.
Yeah, well, there's a very strong military discipline given, where our head office is with our organization. It's very what we like to call battle hardened, right? Our code doesn't sit on the same continent in its entirety. I mean, our redundancies are pretty spectacular. talking redundancies, that's one of the things on the Essential 8 that I wanted to chat about a little bit, as far as backups go, air-gapped backups, obviously with ransomware being super prevalent and now double and triple extortion ransomware. Why is it still a challenge for organizations to, have effective and immediate backup restoration when they're under attack from ransomware?
Sure. So you touched on triple extortion. Let me just explain what triple extortion is. Some of you may not be aware of this. Double extortion is basically where a threat actor will breach an environment that will steal the data, and then they will encrypt your system so that they take down your systems. And what they're essentially asking for is 2 bites of the cherry, right? One is for a ransom for the actual encrypted devices, and the other is so that they don't actually sell your data or make it public. So that's what double extortion is.
Double extortion, yeah.
Triple extortion is I wouldn't even say it's a new trend anymore, because we've seen this last year. And what it is basically now threat actors are actually going through the database that they've stolen, and they're actually reaching out to your customers and threatening them that they will use or sell the data, their personal data, if they don't pay a ransom. So that's what triple extortion is. And from a ransomware point of view, unless you're obviously encrypting the data, and unless you've got you've got to encrypt the data, obviously, right? But in terms of backups, you've got to have those offline backups, because threat actors are spending anywhere between 200 to 250 days inside environments. It's not a case of they'll get a foothold into your environment and just launch an attack. They will understand your environment. They will go from one part of your business to another part of your business. They will understand where your crown jewels are. They will really ingrain themselves even inside your Active Directories. And so the challenge here, of course, is that you can do your backups, and you can do your offline backups as well. Of course, offline backups are really important, because you do want to have something that you can use to basically recover your operation, but also be mindful that threat actors are embedding themselves for months in. So when you are recovering, you may actually be recovering with that tainted data, and so the nightmare starts again.
Right. Yeah. Super challenging.
So really important that you have tools to be able to surgically remove those threats from those backup data and from your machines.
I hadn't known that
visibility.
The average, what do you say, 200 days on average, threat actors are inside the environment just sneaking around? I didn't know that.
It's actually more than 2. I think it's about, according to Polymer Institute, it's about 207 days, I think, before threats are identified on average, and then it's another 70 or 80 days before remediation.
What people have to realize is they're running a business. I mean, it's a nice way of putting it to a group of horrific people, but they're running a business. And so when payouts are in the millions, and let's say you've got 2 or 3 of these on the go when you're in there for 200 days, let's say a year, right? But you're going to make maybe 3 million, 4 million bucks a pop, and you're going to maybe get 2 or 3 a year. That's an okay living, right, for these cybercrime syndicates. And so understanding that, I'll never forget the great story. So we have this incident response team, fantastic. Dan Wiley gave birth and really put this entire department together, one of our heroes here in the US. And this was quite a few years ago. He said that we were helping an organization that had been under ransomware attack. The FBI were working with us too. The customer decided to pay the ransom. It's not something we recommend, but we are also not the victim. So, hey, we support you in your decision. Anyway, so they went to pay the ransom, and there was a little bit of a challenge. And so there was an 800 number, a support line for the threat actors to help the victim pay the money. And so when they picked up the phone, and of course the FBI is listening in because they're trying to figure all this out, trying to catch these guys too. The support call was brilliant English. A very lovely lady picked up the phone, very polite, probably better than you would get on support from your telco, and super helpful. And after the victim made payment to the criminal organization, the criminals issued a receipt. And on the bottom of the receipt, it said 50% discount coupon if we get you again. Like the
Wow.
nerve of these people, the nerve of these people, right? So look, this is for them, how they're running their business and how they're feeding their families and doing whatever with their ill-gotten gains. And once we get that into our heads, we can begin to understand that, okay, there's strategy to it. This is not some script kiddie that's just tapping away in their mother's basement. There's strategy that they are using and strategy that we need to have, to circumvent these kind of threats.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Eddie, you'd remember a research that we published maybe about 3-4 weeks ago on the Conti ransomware group, and the reality is that there were organizations, or there were departments within this organization that didn't know that they were actually working for a threat actor. As far as they were aware, they were working for a pen tester. So there are members within these criminal groups that don't actually realize that they are working for a threat actor. And what we realize is that based on all the revelations that happened with the leaked messages, as you know, Eddie, for this group, we identified that they had specialist negotiators. They had specialist QA teams. They had specialist HR people, right? So it is a very well-run organization, some of these threat actors.
I hadn't read that report. I hadn't got that one. So what you're telling me is that there are some people out there who think they're working for a legitimate organization. Of course, we're now decentralized, right? So, work from home, great. And so they put up a fake front, probably just a website, easy enough, and hire people. And these people are actually engaged in criminal activity and they don't even know it.
Correct. They also had a refer a friend, a referral system for hiring as well. Basically, these groups look exactly like a tech startup. And in some cases, they would leverage partnerships, right? So, initial access brokers. So there are organizations that already have access to many of the organizations, many of their victims, and they don't do anything with it. They just sell that access. So they're referred to as initial access brokers. Threat actors can quite easily just go to these partners, as they call them, and say, hey, listen, I want an organization in Australia, a government agency maybe, and I want them to have this kind of revenue or this particular sector, and this is my requirement for the victim. And then the initial access brokers will provide them with with a list of options, and they even have a system where they will agree that the payment will come in the form once they've actually received a ransom. 10%, 5% of that will go to the initial access broker. So that model exists.
Yeah. These are truly syndicates of cybercrime now. I think we should wrap up our show, my friend. Let's have a look here. So I've got Katrina. Thank you very much for jumping in again. Yes, there is the contact information for getting the Essential 8 white paper. Also, you've got the form there to fill out on the survey so that we can reward you with a great offer of a security checkup for coming into our show today. So thank you very much, everybody. And Ashwin, any last thoughts or comments? And please let the audience know where they can find you on LinkedIn.
Sure. Folks, the document that we've put together will really help you mature your cybersecurity capability across all of the vectors that I talked, all of the environments I talked about. So your cloud, your endpoint, your network, and of course, mobile security as well. Don't let this be your weak link in your cyber strategy. So have a look at the document and understand how you can map the Essential 8 controls and enhance those controls in the different environments that you're running. Beautiful. And I can be found on LinkedIn. Just Ashwin Ram. Just do a search for Ashwin Ram Checkpoint, and you'll find me.
Ashwin Ram Checkpoint. Maybe add Sydney in there in case there's a few others. But like me, you've got an unusual name. If you want to follow up with me, it's just Eddie Doyle Manhattan. Should be the only one that pops up there too. Ashwin, this was great, man. So listen, ladies and gentlemen, continue to comment because we will farm them through the archive. If you would like us to do more of these, we will come back and do more. Ashwin, thank you so much for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, be safe online. Really appreciate everybody's comments and thoughts here today. And until then, next time, goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, Eddie.
All right. Beautiful.